Left-wing extremism. This refers to movements that oppose the current political and economic systems. Some view it as further to the left of communist parties on the political spectrum. These groups want to replace the existing order with either a communist system or an anarchist society without rulers. They often view current laws as tools of oppression that protect capitalist or authoritarian structures. They believe that achieving true equality and freedom requires the elimination of capitalism, which they see as closely tied to exploitation. Far-left groups often also support the redistribution of income and wealth. Some adherents oppose liberal democratic systems and view freedom plus social equality as absolute values. Left-wing extremists often reject reforms, seeing revolution as the only way to bring about change, and some are willing to use violence and arson to reach their goals. These groups, like autonomists and anti-fascists, are anti-establishment and may engage in violent acts against those they consider fascists or racists. In the context of anti-fascism, organized groups carry out direct and extremely violent attacks on political opponents to establish Nazi-free zones. Similarly, the ideas of anti-gentrification and anti-repression are used to justify physical assaults on police officers, politicians, and business people. However, left-wing extremism can vary significantly by region. Right-wing extremism refers to a range of radical conservative, ultranationalist, and authoritarian beliefs. These ideologies often include nativist tendencies and may be marked by anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiments, racism, and xenophobia. Right-wing extremists generally oppose equality and democracy, believing instead that a person's worth is based on their ethnicity or nation. Anti-Semitism is a central aspect of right-wing extremism, manifested through conspiracies about Jewish control or blaming Jews collectively for the actions of the State of Israel. Right-wing extremists also reject socialism and communism, favoring authoritarian governance. This often includes a call for a dictatorship where power is concentrated in a single leader. Contemporary right-wing extremism includes neo-fascism, neo-Nazism, white supremacy movements, the Third Position, and the alt-right. Violence is imminent in the right-wing extremist ideology, seen in both spontaneous attacks on political opponents or immigrants and planned right-wing terrorist acts. Vigilantism. This is the act of preventing, investigating, and punishing crimes without legal authority. A vigilante is someone who takes justice in their own hands, acting without official permission to enforce safety or order. Key features of vigilantism entail: it is planned and carried out by private volunteers, it often involves or threatens the use of force, it arises when people believe that societal norms or security are under threat, and the main goal is to combat crime and ensure safety, especially for participants. There's different types. The first one is vigilante terrorism. An example includes the Ku Klux Klan lynchings targeting minorities accused of violating the moral order of white supremacy. The second type are certain paramilitary militia movements. Then there's vigilante border patrols that aim to control issues like undocumented migration. Another type are simple street patrols, which have groups patrolling areas to deter crime and protect locals. Vigilantism often arises during perceived societal crisis when people believe authorities are failing to protect them. It thrives in environments with distrust in government and where armed self-defense laws are more lenient. Eco-extremism. This refers to radical environmental movements that advocate for extreme actions, sometimes including illegal or violent methods to protect the environment or combat ecological destruction. These groups often believe that mainstream environmentalism is insufficient and demand urgent, direct action to address issues like deforestation, climate change, and pollution. Eco-extremists may target corporations, governments, or individuals they see as responsible for environmental harm. Their tactics can include sabotage, property destruction, tree spiking, and violent protests. Gender-based extremism. This refers to ideologies and movements that use extreme measures, including violence or radical activism, to enforce specific views on gender roles. This includes groups advocating for gender segregation or domination of one gender over another, often rooted in misandry or misogyny. Radical feminism calls for a profound transformation of society, aiming to to eliminate male supremacy across all social and economic spheres and challenging traditional gender roles. Unlike earlier feminist movements, radical feminism seeks not just to end male privilege, but to dissolve the concept of gender altogether, aiming for a society where genital differences are culturally irrelevant. Radical feminists attribute women's oppression primarily to patriarchal gender relations. On the other side, there is radical anti-feminism. This extreme response perceives feminism or progressive gender movements as threats to societal norms. Radical anti-feminist groups often push back against feminist gains, advocating for a return to traditional gender roles or undermining feminist efforts. This can include ultra-masculism movements, which adopt extreme views to address perceived injustices against men and may react violently or aggressively towards feminist initiatives. Reactionism. Reactionary refers to political views that advocate for a return to a previous state of society, which is believed to have had positive traits now missing. But reactionism isn't just about missing the past. It means people let their idealized view of a past time influence their beliefs and choices, even if they didn't personally experience that era. It's often associated with a strong traditionalist conservative stance opposed to social, political, and economic change, but also with the motivation of restoring policies from the past in an attempt to restore societal stability. Reactionary ideologies can be radical in their pursuit of restoring past conditions through extreme measures. Historically, this term described those idealizing feudalism and pre-modern times before the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. Today, reactionism is linked to movements like national populism, the alt-right, neo-fascism, and anti-modernism. Reactionaries typically resist progressivism, emphasizing the preservation of traditional values and structures. They often view contemporary changes as detrimental and seek to reverse them. National chauvinism. This is the unreasonable belief in the superiority and dominance of one's own nation or group, viewing it as strong and virtuous while considering others weak or inferior. It's an extreme form of patriotism and nationalism marked by an uncritical glorification of one's own nation and hostility toward others, even when faced with strong opposition. National chauvinists often spread hate and devalue other nations, sometimes leading to physical attacks on people from other nationalities. Their goal is to secure a privileged position for their nation by suppressing or eliminating other groups, seeing them as threats to their society. This can include the violent assimilation or domination of smaller national or ethnic groups within their territory. Fundamentalism. This refers to the strict, literal interpretation of religious texts, doctrines, or ideologies, often paired with a strong focus on separating pure members of a group from outsiders. This leads to a desire to return to an idealized past from which followers believe their group has strayed. Though often linked to religion, fundamentalism is a modern response to secular, liberal, and modernist trends. It emerged in early 20th century American Christianity, but is now applied to movements in various religions. Christian fundamentalism demands strict adherence to traditional doctrines and has been linked to child abuse and corporal punishment. Islamic fundamentalism dates back to groups like the Kharijites in the 7th century, known for declaring other Muslims as unbelievers. Jewish fundamentalism includes militant religious Zionism and forms of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. Buddhist fundamentalism has led to violence against other religious groups in countries like Myanmar and Sri Lanka. Sikh fundamentalism became prominent with figures like Janaya Singh Bhindranwale, who opposed certain groups he saw as heretical. But even non-religious movements like New Atheism have been criticized as a form of secular fundamentalism. Separatism. This is the push for a group to break away from a larger political entity, often leading to the creation of new states. It usually refers to complete political separation, but can also involve cultural, ethnic, tribal, religious, or regional separation. While similar to secession, separatism tends to focus on full political independence, whereas autonomy movements may seek more limited self-governance. Separatist movements can be driven by various factors, such as resentment toward other groups, opposition to government decisions, belief that the state no longer supports or has betrayed the group's interests, desire to preserve cultural, religious, or linguistic traditions, or economic reasons. Whether separatists choose peaceful methods or violence often depends on leadership and the government's response. Fanaticism. This defines an extreme and obsessive dedication to a cause, belief, or ideology. It goes beyond normal enthusiasm and often leads to irrational or violent actions. Fanatics hold rigid standards and show little tolerance for differing opinions or ideas. Fanaticism frequently arises when leaders make small changes to existing beliefs, driving followers into a fervent, cult-like state. It is characterized by closed-mindedness, blind faith, and extreme reactions to opposition. A common form is religious fanaticism, identified by blind devotion, persecution of dissenters, and disregard for reality, often viewed as the most extreme form of fundamentalism. Cumulative extremism. This phenomenon refers to a process where different forms of political or ideological extremism reinforce and escalate each other. When one extremist group mobilizes in response to another, it can create a cycle of radicalization and violence, sometimes called reciprocal intergroup radicalization. This dynamic often occurs between opposing groups such as far-right and Islamic extremists or left-wing extremists targeting right-wing counterparts. The escalation leads to increased hostility and social polarization. It amplifies existing tensions and can trigger broader societal divisions. Radicalism. This ideology advocates for fundamental and significant changes to political or social systems. It aims for deep reform rather than the complete overthrow of existing structures. Radicalism can be left-wing or right-wing and doesn't always involve violence or illegal actions. It focuses on transforming society through extreme changes in policies or ideologies. Radicalism involves a dynamic and non-linear process called radicalization, which involves two main dimensions. The first is cognitive radicalization, which is the process where individuals adopt extreme political or religious beliefs that oppose fundamental societal values such as democracy and the rule of law. It involves a growing commitment to these ideologies. The second part is behavioral radicalization, which refers to engaging in extreme activities which can be either violent or non-violent. This is driven by a perceived moral obligation to take direct action. Subscribe for more videos and check out my channel to discover other interesting topics.